So I guess to start, we'll just make some introductions for the panelists. So maybe we'll start with Simon.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'm Simon de Rouviere. Currently have my own business called Untitled Frontier, writing fiction, selling NFTs related to it. And I've been working in the space for several years. I helped co-design the ERC20 standard and have been working with NFTs for quite a while. So that's me.
Okay, hi, I'm Anett, and I'm working with Ethereum Magicians. Right now I'm working on NFT standards wiki and leading NFT standards working group. I'm in the space since 2019 and been around the AIPs and ER scene since that.
Hi, I'm Pooja. I work at Protocol Labs as the head of product. So we build IPFS, Filecoin, and a couple of different products on top of those technologies, like NFT.storage is a new product that we built specifically for NFT developers to make it easier for them to use decentralized storage and content addressing, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about today. And I've been in this space, I guess, since 2017, so 4-ish years.
Hi, I'm Richard Ma. I'm the CEO of Quantstamp. So we're a leading security auditing company, and we've been auditing a lot of NFT projects like marketplaces. So we audited like the People, Art Drop, and also many leading marketplaces like Super Rare, and also like fractionalized art and things like that. So, and also a very avid NFT collector. And we've done like, also like NBA Top Shots on Flow blockchain, and we're currently auditing Solana as well. So happy to moderate the panel. Oh, awesome. So I guess to start, maybe does anyone want to talk about the role of standards in NFTs and what types of problems there currently are? Because it might not be apparent to everyone that what problems there are and why do we need standards.
Yeah, I can start. I think, from my perspective as a developer in the space, I think one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is primarily the metadata surrounding NFTs. There's obviously more like file storage, where things are hosted, the URIs and so forth, but primarily the metadata because initially with the ERC 721 standard, it was supposed to support certain data or like certain URIs of where the data is. But as people have started experimenting, there was like more custom kind of metadata that was developed by companies like OpenSea that then people just started adopting without there being other kind of consultation with further developers. And that caused a lot of headaches where essentially the solution was this is supposed to be supported based on like normal web standards, but it's not. And so either people funneled it into strange metadata in the NFT metadata, or they had to like basically find a way to talk to OpenSea to support like custom standards. And I think that's where currently for me a lot of headaches are, is just like getting these things to work out of the box. And these standards exist. Like, there are schema formats in Web 2. There are MIME types that have existed obviously since the start of the web. And then also things like Protocol Labs, which have introduced multi-formats with multi-hashes and all these things that make content addressing fairly straightforward, and it just hasn't seen that broad adoption.
And I guess for metadata, you mean things like attributes, right? Like, for example, I don't know, the rarity of the cat, or
it's like in a metadata, you obviously have like the name of the NFT, the description, the image, where is the image located, and then also additional features like different attributes, like. But the attributes collection, for example, was custom built by OpenSea, and everyone just started adopting that as the primary way to create traits or attributes around NFTs. Yeah.
I guess for Anett, so you've been helping with the standards working group. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's working? What was the story of how you started that, and kind of how do standards get created?
Okay, so the story goes back to April this year, when the NFTs were popping and they were starting to be very popular. And so we, as Ethereum Magicians, wanted to contribute to the community and always wanted to help out the community more. And so the NFTs is a huge opportunities for us where we can help. So I looked into ERC 721 standard, notice how broken the standard is, especially from, like, for example, the metadata in 721 are defined by token URI, which links to hash, to, for example, like IPFS hash or other centralized server link where the metadata are stored. So I explored whole 721 and I found another standards that are related to NFTs. There are around 14 standards that relates to NFTs for now. The only 3 of them are in final stage and are running on Ethereum blockchains, which is 721, 1155, and the royalty standard, which is 2981, I believe. So these 3, the last one got recently implemented on the chain. So in a wiki you can find all of these rewritten, and I added a bunch of resources to the wiki, and then right now I'm leading working group, and we are looking into the problems that we are facing with NFTs, and we are trying to find a solution. Especially as Simon mentioned with the metadata, it's a huge issue that we all are facing in the ecosystem, and especially with 721 being so simple standard, the metadata are such a mess, especially as 721 was made in 2017, it got implemented in 2018 to the network, where we wasn't thinking of how to introduce the metadata and how to even use the metadata. So right now the OpenSea has the standard for that, which is not really good one, as there's still a bunch of mess around that as well.
I guess Pooja, so like, Anett touched upon the issue with having some centralized storage of the metadata, right? So what kind of innovations are there in better storage for NFTs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, to the question you also asked earlier to Simon about like why are standards important, it's, I think, enabling interoperability between a lot of different systems. It like creates a good framework within which people can then be really creative and expect that whatever they do will be safe and future-proofed and not broken and retrievable and all of these things, right? And like with standards, like kind of need to find the right balance between being a framework, but also being like really open. On the storage side, one of the things that we've seen with like the way that a lot of people are interacting with NFTs, there's just so many different ways that people store NFT data, the actual like data for an NFT, and it could be like on some sort of cloud somewhere, like centralized cloud. It could be added into IPFS, but not like properly stored on some sort of decentralized storage network. The URLs are constructed in a lot of different ways. So often, we've seen like when people will actually go back sometimes and try to retrieve the actual data that's associated with an NFT, it may not be there because maybe like the person who was paying for the cloud hosting decided to stop doing that, or if it wasn't properly like stored on it's like somewhere, it was like added to IPFS, but not like actually stored somewhere, then it's also not accessible sometimes. And so there are all of these ways in which like people have these really unhappy surprises when they don't like store their data properly. And so one of the things that we've been, as people who really want to see this ecosystem and this like the creativity within the NFT space really thrive, we've been trying to find ways to help make it like really, really easy for developers to do the storage and content addressing piece. So they don't really have to like think about how to do it in the right way, and like then they get the right metadata that you need to be able to get the data later. It's properly like persisted on Filecoin, or it could be another decentralized storage network, so it's accessible like anywhere in the world, and you don't need to have special permits to access it or anything like that. So there's been a lot of thinking around how can we like make it really easy for folks to get the benefits of decentralized storage and like permanence and persistence without having to learn about all the nuances of decentralized storage.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know you guys launched like NFT.storage, which is a way to
exactly.
help people with it. And I guess one of the common misconceptions, I guess, like for the audience here, is that people think just because like Ethereum is permanent, that their NFTs, like the JPEGs, are permanently there, and it's not true because that picture or those attributes could just be pointing to some AWS server, and when like things change around, it could be lost forever if you don't right-click and save it. So
yeah, exactly. And like things like the I think folks may have seen on Twitter, like earlier this year, like the rug pulls on places like OpenSea, where people bought an NFT and then the image like changed, and so out from under you, right? And so it's like being able to prevent things like that, so that when you're buying something, it is actually the thing, and there are like cryptographic proofs that say that show you that this can't be messed with, it can't be altered. The thing you're buying is like actually the legit thing, and it is forever yours. So like content addressing and making that like really easy for developers. We're working with like OpenSea and other marketplaces too to like get them to also use things like NFT.storage so that that's easy.
There's also a standard I believe was spearheaded by the Flow or Dapper Labs, where if the metadata is not on chain, then you can have an additional set of proofs in the contracts themselves or the code themselves that give you that integrity to know like if the metadata that you will retrieve from elsewhere will not change to different formats, or there won't be a literal rug pull change in your NFT. So there are a bunch of ways which people are trying to like mitigate these issues in different ways.
Totally.
But I think it's quite early still, because a lot of the NFT boom happened this year, and so now people might not care so much because it doesn't seem like your favorite NFT project servers have gone offline yet. But I mean, I suspect in the next 2 to 5 years, people will definitely start seeing this happen to some extent.
Yeah, the ones I care most about are the rocks, if people have heard about the rocks. So, it's not even ERC 721, it's actually ERC 20. And you have to wrap the rocks, and they're literally just pictures of rocks. Each one of them are worth like $2 million. And those pictures could be gone forever. So I, right-clicked and saved that one.
Yeah. Oh, there are more NFTs that are defined as 720. ERC 20, like mainly the OGs NFTs like Mooncats and CryptoPunks.
Yeah, and I guess, what do you guys think about cross-chain standards for NFTs? So like the ability to bring an NFT to a different chain, because sometimes it's a different programming language or just a different paradigm on that chain. Do you have any thoughts on that part?
So Ceramics is focused on decentralized identities around blockchains, and they're making standards for various blockchain solutions. And recently they made CIP 94, which is focused on NFTs, and they are trying to bridge the NFTs to a bunch of blockchain solutions. But from what I saw, that for example 721 or like principles of 721 are running on Kusama as well, which is Polkadot.
And I guess, Simon, you're the co-creator of the ERC 20 standard. Do you want to talk about like the process from making a standard, where the number comes from, right? Why is it 1155? And how long does it take? And how do you get all the stakeholders?
I think it's always a difficult problem, primarily because like it feels like it's a game of chicken. Like there can always be more inputs and more trade-offs and decisions that could be made. And the reality is someone just needs to run with it and either make the mistake or lead with it, and then everyone follows along. Remember with the ERC 20 standard, it's actually a fairly simple standard, but there was like a lot of discussion on like, how do you give control to someone else over your account? And obviously now we know this as the approve function. So you approve someone else to be able to control your money. But back then it was like, to use Ethereum didn't cost like 20 to $50 a transaction. It was like less than $1. And so the considerations in the design was, it's okay if people are going to issue more transactions, right? But now it's just like, now you realize like if you have that 2 transactions you need to do every time. It's like, I have an NFT, but I want to put it in a marketplace. That means it's 2 or 3 transactions that you have to do, and that it's unnecessary. And so obviously you can only learn that by actually having adoption. And then, but back then it was like, it wasn't it wasn't something that was proposed to be much different. But now you have different things. Like I know Anett also wrote quite extensively in the wiki about the permit function, which is you give someone control to transfer your assets off chain with a signature, and then you can take that signature and transfer it on chain. So at the end of the day, it's like it is not straightforward. And yes, people will always complain that there's something wrong with the ERC20 standard. We could have done things better. Same with the ERC 721. It's like why is there two standards for assets? Why isn't it just one? And then everyone learns about it. So like the Tezos standard, the Solana standard, some of the Flow standards, they all go like, well, we never should have had like two separate standards for different kinds of fungible or non-fungible tokens. And so in that way, it's always a constant learning process. But at the end of the day, as a developer, you just want it to be good enough. And even though the standards are a bit weird, or these things aren't the best they could have been, at the end of the day, someone needs to actually make the code and get the product into the hands of users. And that always takes it's a risk and a gamble, and someone just needs to do it. But again, you can always learn about it and like make sure that we don't make these more mistakes into the future. I think especially with the metadata stuff, that seems like it could have been done better. But here we are,
Yeah, makes sense. And then I think like for new chains like Solana, they kind of learned from that. And, for example, Metaplex is a startup that just kind of became popular enough that people just use their standard. So it kind of organically happens when sometimes there's enough demand. Yeah, it makes sense. What are people's thoughts on royalties and licensing? So, like for example, Uniswap, they came out with like a novel, I guess, legal license for Uniswap v3 to prevent copying. But usually in art, I think artists tend to copy each other anyways, and NFTs are kind of blurred in that way. Are there standards for licenses and royalties, and how do you see that evolving?
There is standard for royalty, which got recently implemented, and it was made by non-origin people. So this standard is finally live, and it's just waiting for platforms to catch it and to implement it. So we will have finally unified royalties, although it's probably tying to business models of NFT platforms. As a lot of NFT platforms are built off the royalties, and they're kind of like living off the royalties, and it's their business model. So it's kind of going against that, but at least artists will get finally nice royalties from secondary sales.
Yeah, I think royalties make sense, and it's great that the standard so that the marketplaces can instead of the marketplaces defining the royalties, they see if there is a standard, and then they can adopt that instead versus choosing a royalty per platform. In terms of licensing, I mean that's always been like a big rabbit hole in itself, because obviously NFTs is quite new, and that people have different perceptions or understanding about what's being transferred or traded. In terms of like, is the copyright transferred or not? Like, do you have additional IP that ownership that comes with transferring the assets and so forth? There has been work done in terms of standards. And this was, I remember working, so previously I had a music startup, so that's even worse with IP and licensing than just art. And so we worked with Protocol Labs actually on defining a standard called Koala IP for licensing with on-chain assets. But I think it hasn't gotten enough adoption merely because like people aren't necessarily currently going to an NFT and going, I want to use this platform for a license. It's more like I'm just enjoying this picture of this rock, and that's great.
Yeah.
CryptoKitties made actually a license, and I mean it's live, but it's not being
license,
used.
Yeah, it's almost like sometimes you want people to copy you, right? Like for example, CryptoPunks, they had like the Binance Punks and the Solana Punks, and it doesn't really detract from the original. It kind of like does some marketing for the original and makes it more, authentic.
This might be a controversial opinion, but I always thought like it's much better for much of this content to be as freely accessible and permissively licensed as possible, because your revenue is funneled into ownership, not in terms of like I own the IP, but like my connection to whatever this is. And so it's probably the future, like 10 years from now, will be like people aren't going to be issuing licenses as much as they're just like participating in collecting and having fun with the experience. And that's probably where you see it. Most of the content generally is not maybe flow, like there you need proper licensing and so forth. But who knows? Obviously I'm prepared to be wrong. So.
License is sort of tied to copyright as well. And I think that licenses are great, so artists can have some sort of ownership or control over the artwork itself, so they don't get published to wherever.
Especially with like with multi-chain minting, and like, you know, minting a particular asset on one chain and then bringing it to another chain, and just making sure that the actual owner gets the right, you know, retains some license or copyright or whatever it is. Even if, so it's not like forged and, you know, like doesn't have a new owner, even though, so I think there may be some areas where that is a helpful thing, but
it even gets more confusing when you realize that people are using NFTs, which is unclear, or like most people that engage with it don't understand the copyright or IP issues involved with it. But then you also have a lot of people creating generative art, which in itself still has to go through a lot of like legal wrangling in order to understand, like the person that uses the software or the person that mints it using the software. It's like, who is the real owner? And also issues even with like GitHub Copilot, where they had to determine like people were frustrated that like permissively licensed code was being used in this machine learning network in order to produce this code. So now you have NFTs, generative art, like all these kind of layers of confusing things where people don't really understand or know what they own. And for that matter, there isn't probably precedent yet until someone starts suing someone and saying, you're not allowed to do this. And obviously, I've seen that people taking open source generative art code and then minting NFTs with it without the consent of the creator or the writer of the source code. It's not that they needed the consent of that writer if it was licensed in that manner, but there's still this weird thing where it's just like, before there's actual like court precedent for like ruling on like how this stuff works in practice, just don't be an asshole. Do right.
So basically, I guess generative art is someone writes software to make pictures, and so they can make almost like infinite number of pictures, and then the artist or the programmer chooses some number of that, like 1,000 of that in the case of, you know, art blocks, and publishes those, and those like the authentic pictures. And if someone else runs the software and makes different ones, it's very ambiguous in terms of like, does that belong to the programmer, or did they do something by running it themselves and creating new ones? So I guess for this last section, so I think we have 5 minutes. Do you want to just like tell us about what's your favorite NFT, and what's your favorite rug pull of an NFT?
So there's this company called Untitled Frontier, right, that produces NFTs. No, I'm kidding.
Tell us about that.
Oh yeah,
it's super interesting.
Okay,
I think not many people know about it.
So it's like we're producing fiction, like I said, early introduction, like sci-fi content, and then selling NFTs as essentially digital merchandise or collectible merchandise from the story. So, you know, if you go watch Star Wars and you really loved it and you want to go to your backyard and swing a physical lightsaber around and make whoosh noises, that experience I want to recreate, but people just going, I really love this. How can I feel like I connect more with this story? And that's part of what we're doing. It's just creating compelling content and stories, and then selling compelling NFTs related to the content. But in this case, we're also pushing like the NFT frontiers in terms of putting all the images on chain in like specific formats, and then also using generative art as well. So just having fun with mixing all the things together. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Favorite NFT?
Anett?
My favorite NFT is Generative Mask. made by the Japan artist. And
Favorite rug pull?
oh, favorite rug pull was the OpenSea rug pull when somebody took off the pictures and replaced that with rugs, with pictures of rugs.
Oh, the actual, oh yeah,
Yeah.
JPEGs of rugs.
Yeah, JPEGs of rugs from like, yeah.
Pooja?
Well, let's see. I think there are a few artists that I personally have found through like some of these really awesome new platforms that I'm partial to, hence purchased them. There's some like really beautiful like artists who are, you know, regular artists, like digital artists in the normal non-crypto world, who found that as an opportunity to like have more of like a platform for their work. And so I don't know if I would say I have a particularly favorite NFT, but I think I really enjoyed the opportunity to support folks like that. But yeah, I think I do get really excited about people using NFTs in really interesting ways as sort of like primitives to experiment with all sorts of new ideas. So I think you mentioned like fractionalizing and like fractional ownership of NFTs. I think people like sort of setting standards in a different way by just like going out and trying things and kind of seeing what works, or people selling like rights to be able to contribute to projects or like comment on things, and it's like a way of supporting your favorite artist or your favorite project, but also like getting to participate. So financially support, but also like participate in other ways with your time and things like that. So I get really excited about those sorts of use cases.
And favorite rug pull?
I don't like rug pulls. I think people should just use IPFS and Filecoin and avoid all the rug pulls. They're really sad. But yeah.
Yeah, I think as more value gets onto NFTs, people are going to really care about the permanent storage aspect, and Filecoin, Arweave, IPFS, it's going to be kind of, more people are going to really understand the importance of it. My own favorite NFT, I think, is like kind of like a DeFi passport. So there's this company called Kong that's making like a passport. So it's kind of not really like a JPEG. It represents your identity in this like digital kind of new country. And so I thought that's pretty innovative. You know,
You're an auditing company, so you should probably know a lot about various rug pulls.
yeah, I hear a lot of cool NFT projects all the time. I think the one that everyone has been discussing is called the Loot project. So if you haven't Googled it, Google it, because it will like blow your mind. Not initially. Initially, you'll be very unimpressed with it. So basically what it is, it's literally just text file NFTs, which is somehow became more simpler instead of more complicated. But I think in the last 3 weeks, there's been 50 startups that have started projects around Loot. And I guess that's another standards problem. Anyone have comments on Loot? Or standardizing derivatives of Loot?
That's probably its own panel right there.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting things.
I guess, just wanted to thank everyone for participating in the panel. And if you want to follow our awesome speakers on Twitter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.